Hello, and welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting from a Christian perspective and a Judeo-Christian worldview from a first-hand real-world perspective. I am your host, Michael Melito. I am a Christian first and foremost. God is first and foremost in my life. I make no apologies for that. You don't have to be a Christian to listen to this, but just know that comes out in everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. Okay, so I have lost use of my microphone for now. It wasn't working when I tried it last. So we're going to go to a throwback from back in the beginning when I used to do the podcast just on my phone, which is what I'm doing now. I'm just going to record it and just put it out. No editing, no nothing like that. So here we go. Rolling into the bio. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. And just a quick bio. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I served in both the United States Marine Corps and the United States Army. I have been to war. I served in combat MOSs, mostly the infantry. I have been law enforcement. I served on LAPD and other agency. I've been a private contractor for the federal government. I'm an FBI certified firearms instructor, NRA certified firearms instructor. I have taught at one of the largest firearms instruction schools in the country. Expert shooter in the military, both rifle and pistol. I am a state champion a couple of times over in rifle and pistol. Been very blessed to compete and win more competitions than I can remember. I've competed in rifle, pistol, shotgun, archery, everything from hatchet throwing to muzzle loader. I've competed in it. I'm a very blessed man to have been able to do all those things. I am currently the commander of a tactical team in a fairly large metropolitan area. So gunfighting is my full-time job. I should also mention, if it comes up in the topic today, that I have been a professional hunter and guide of large game and exotic game like bison, deer, and elk and things like that. Rolling into today's topic, it's going to be on modifications of firearms, mostly handguns. We may throw in some rifle, but handgun modifications. When you should, when you shouldn't, things to consider. So let's roll into the topic, and before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It really does help out. Alright guys, so let's get into modifications. Let's say first and foremost that modifications really do help. They really can make a difference. With the understanding that it's a very small percentage that you're going to gain versus proficiency that you have with that firearm. Meaning your training, your practice, your dry fire regiment, your range time is going to make a far bigger difference in your ability to shoot well than is the modification of the gun. So realize that. The way of the warrior is one of discipline. It's one of being blessed by God to be a warrior, being called, accepted in the calling, heeding it, using your talents. To he who has more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. Use the talents and the gifts you've been given. Like I said, the way of the warrior is a way of discipline, a way of repetition, a way of valuing those skills and abilities and appreciating them. So keep that in mind. But modifications, I'll kind of start from the top and work down. So sights. Sights obviously are important. I would say to know what sights are best for you, you need to get a baseline. Like we said, get out there and train. Dry fire, live fire. Get fairly proficient with the gun, I would suggest, before you modify your sights. I would suggest doing that so you kind of know what you should get and what you should gravitate towards. You may find that, you shoot a certain way and certain kind of sights will lend themselves to that. I'm going to tell you my preference from all the years and all the different things that I've done. I like a bright front sight and a blacked out rear sight. I like, a bright green dot or a red dot. Green is my favorite, but if I can have an obnoxiously bright green front sight and a totally blacked out rear, that is my favorite. Whether it's a night sight or not, that's not super important to me. That being said, I'll get into night sights. Obviously, I am a full-time, that's my full-time job. I'm a professional gunfighter, the leader of a tactical team. I work graves currently, so obviously I work at night in dark environments, and I still don't consider night sights an absolute necessity. And I'll tell you why. They have a very limited application. Obviously, they're for low light or nighttime, but they don't work if the target is completely dark and you're completely dark. Because even if you can see your sights and you can't see your target, you don't know what you're shooting at. So you kind of lose out there. Also, if you're using a flashlight that's mounted to your firearm, then you don't really need night sights because your target is illuminated and you can see the silhouette of your sights, whether they're night sights or not. Also, if you're using a handheld light and you're proficient in practice with that, you can illuminate your sights and you can use just regular sights. So they're not beneficial for that. Where night sights are beneficial is in a very limited application where you don't want to use any light and your target is illuminated but you're in the dark. And there are times when that is good. So your target is illuminated, you're in the dark, and you can still do it without night sights, but night sights kind of help you acquire that sight picture a little bit faster. So I'm not saying they're useless, I'm just saying that that would be one of my last considerations for sights. But night sights are a thing. If you find a set of sights that you really like and they happen to be night sights, then yeah, there's no issue with them. Also realize that night sights they use tritium, I believe, is the only kind. They may use some other radioactive elements, but as far as I know, unless they're like just glow-in-the-dark stickers, which they do have sometimes, but like the traditional night sight is going to be tritium. And tritium has a half-life. It's radioactive, so every day that you use them, they'll be less bright than they were the day before, so just realize that. They have a half-life, I believe, of around 12 years for tritium, so keep that in mind. So, like I've mentioned in other podcasts, just a quick tip: if you have black front and rear sights and you want to modify them, or you have the traditional 3-dot sights, which I don't care much for, you can put some obnoxiously bright colored nail polish on your front sight. A little tip to go beyond that: if you take a toothpick and you take just a little dab of that, you can put just that bright colored paint inside that white dot and just make that front sight a little bit brighter if you want to do that. You can also just take a Sharpie, which I tend to do if it comes with dot sights, and just black out the rear sight. So I'll just take a Sharpie and make the entire rear sight black. And also, when I use my guns hard, they tend to wear off the bluing on the sights and they'll become shiny, which makes it hard to get a crisp sight picture. So I will also take a Sharpie from time to time and just black out those sights. Or you can just do the old tip of spraying some black spray paint in a can and like the top of the lid, and taking a Q-tip and putting that black paint on there, waiting until it gets real good and viscous and sticky, and just painting over those sights to make them black again, especially on the leading edge, the top edge. Okay, so we've talked about sights. One other quick caveat: suppressor sights. Suppressor sights are good if you're running a suppressor, obviously. They can also be good because they're big sights. So you might just want to put those on there anyway. I don't do that, but I have no problem with people that do. They're bigger sights, so you tend to be able to acquire them a little bit faster if you want to do that. There's not really much of a disadvantage on a handgun and running suppressor sights all the time, unless you're worried about height over bore and really precise shooting. But most importantly for those sights, get ones that work for you and your shooting technique. Also get ones that shoot point of aim, point of impact. That is really important. Some people like to shoot with a 6 o'clock hold, or some guns are set up for a 6 o'clock hold, and some guns are set up for a dead-on hold. And you need to know which one you prefer and which one your gun is sighted in at. Especially, Glock shooters are a little bit different. Glock shooters, generally with the Glock factory sights, you don't shoot where the dot is on your front sight, which is the way that I like to shoot. In general, those are set up so that the bullet will impact on top of your front sight, which can make a difference if you're trying to make like a hostage shot or something like that. So make sure you know that. Make sure you know your sights. They can be the best sights in the world, but if the bullet doesn't go where you're aiming, then the sights don't really serve their purpose. So keep that in mind. Next mod I'm going to talk about is barrels. You're probably not going to need a new barrel in your gun until you shoot it out, which does happen from time to time. And until you become a really good handgun shooter or a really good rifle shooter, you're probably not going to notice a difference in a handgun barrel, but it really can make a difference. A custom match fit barrel really can make a difference when you get to that level. So you may think about that once you've worn out your first handgun barrel, your first rifle barrel. You may think about upgrading to a match grade barrel, a national match barrel, something like that, something with a precise chambering, a real precise high-end barrel manufacturer with a really precise fit, a real good bushing barrel fit, a really good slide to barrel fit, something like that. So when you get to that point, you'll probably know enough to know what you want on that. You may also want to upgrade your barrel, not really for pistol, but sometimes, actually I take that back, sometimes with a pistol. If you prefer heavier bullets in a rifle or a pistol, sometimes you may have to upgrade a barrel to a faster twist rate. So keep that in mind. It does come into play. I like to shoot 147s, and I know there are some guns out there that don't handle those as well, even handgun barrels, because they don't twist them fast enough. At least I've been told. I've never run into that personally, but I have been told that is a thing, and I believe that to be a thing. But do your own research. Make sure the barrel twist rate is good to stabilize the bullets that you're firing it in. The next thing we'll go to and touch on, a big thing, is triggers. Triggers are important, guys. Triggers are obviously important to shooting a handgun well. But you have to have good, solid fundamentals like we talked about earlier. And a lot of people, I guess because it's easily quantifiable, they look at the trigger pull weight. Just making a trigger lighter does not necessarily make it better. Realize that. If you take a crappy trigger and make it light, then you have a light, crappy trigger. I would rather have a heavy, crisp, clean trigger than a light, mushy, crappy, unpredictable trigger. So just don't look at the weight. Don't assume because it's a 3.5 pound trigger that it's better than a 5.5 pound trigger. That's not necessarily the case. In some cases, you may lighten it up, and because of tolerances and things, it may become more mushy, more unpredictable, and it may actually be worse. I don't generally run super light triggers. I have a few exceptions. If it's for a specific discipline like Steel Challenge, if I'm trying to drag race with a pistol and go super, super fast, obviously if there's less travel in the trigger and less weight in the trigger, I can run it really fast. But even me with a lot of experience doing that, the vast majority of my guns have a factory trigger or a heavy trigger in them. The exception to that would be ARs. A factory military AR trigger, if you're trying to do any kind of precise rifle work, is kind of a crappy trigger that it comes with out of the box. If we're talking about the mil-spec triggers, they're kind of atrocious. I would look at upgrading one of those. Maybe not your first upgrade, get a good optic on there. But after that, a trigger, especially on an AR, that comes with a pretty crappy trigger, if we're talking the mil-spec trigger. Certainly they can be shot well. Like I said, Marine Corps infantry expert rifleman, I hit man-sized targets with iron sights with a crappy military 3-round burst, which is generally can have a different trigger pull with every 3 rounds. You'll rotate trigger pull. So pretty bad trigger pull, but you can still hit a man-sized target out to 500 yards with iron sights if you have good fundamentals. It can be done, but they are pretty crappy triggers, so I would look at upgrading those when you can. But the big thing on that is don't just assume a lighter trigger is a better trigger. Also, don't I'll just say use caution if it's any kind of duty gun or gun you're going to use for defense, and make your own decision on that as a grown man. It's generally frowned upon to use anything but a factory trigger in a defensive gun. In general, there are some exceptions, and that may not apply to you, but just keep that in mind if that is a consideration. If it's a factory option, if the factory comes with a better trigger, like some guns you can get like the Pro model, or from even send it back to the manufacturer and have them do a trigger job on something like Smith & Wesson on a Performance Center revolver or something like that. So you may consider that if you do want a little bit better, smoother trigger and you don't want the liability on yourself. But triggers are a big one. Make sure you try and master the fundamentals first before you go messing with the trigger. But the trigger modification, I won't say that it's ineffective. It really can make you a better shooter. So, either get a gun that starts off with a good trigger, or look at upgrading the trigger when you think the trigger is holding you back. The next thing we'll talk about is I guess the aftermarket magazines, if we consider a standard magazine, what it comes with, not a high capacity magazine is not a thing. I don't think the way that the media uses it. It's the standard capacity. It's what the gun comes with. A Glock 19 comes with a 15 round magazine. A Glock 17 comes with a 17 round magazine. Glock 19 comes with a 15 round magazine. An AR comes standard with a 30 round magazine. So I'm talking about a higher capacity than that. If you want to modify your magazine with these big base pads, I generally don't do that. I have a few magazines that I'll do that on. But in general, I'll run a factory magazine because they tend to be the most reliable. And in most gunfights, like I said, I'm a professional gunfighter. In most gunfights, having those few extra rounds is really not going to be a thing. But if you're going to run the base pads, don't get the cheap, get the cheap made in China Super Extendo 5000 mag. Get a good solid factory mag, and then a good solid factory extension from a reputable manufacturer. Something like Terran Tactical, something like, so one of the big good companies that's known for making good quality products. If you're going to get an extended Glock mag, get a Glock factory extended mag. If you're talking about the 33 round mag, or something like that, a good quality manufacturer like an Amen 2 or something like that. I don't get any kickbacks or anything from any of these companies. I'm mentioning some. I'm sure I'm leaving out plenty. But a good quality magazine, a good quality manufacturer. And if you're using your guns hard, especially your handgun magazines and your AR magazines, the springs will wear out. But the good news is the springs are cheap. So when you start having issues with them, just get new ones. The springs I'm talking about. The springs are fairly cheap. Unless it's a feed lip issue, just throw some new springs in there. They're usually a couple of bucks. And springs do wear out. Alright guys, where are we? Talking about magazine extensions. Another thing worth mentioning is the firearm finish. There's a lot of finishes out there. Cerakote has become a big thing. Cerakote is great. Cerakote is very resistant to the elements. It's a great finish. It is great. Ion Bond is also great. And those other kind of ionic bonded coatings are also great. They have a little bit more wear resistance for guns that are going to shoot a lot, but a little bit less, I believe, elemental resistance to the elements in Cerakote. But both of those are great finishes. But both of those require you either getting the gun like that or sending the gun off to have it professionally done. There are a couple of other coatings you can do yourself. Dura Bake, Dura Coat, Brownells and Midway may have their own, different name brands of that. I've used a bunch of different ones, and they work great. They work very well. I wouldn't say they're quite as good as Cerakote, but they're probably, at least a good ceramic coating ones that you bake in the oven yourself, are probably 80% as good, in my opinion. And I'm just kind of throwing that number out there as my opinion, but they are very good, and they're very wear resistant. So you can look at those if you want to do it yourself. Also, if you just want to do it yourself, there's nothing wrong with good old-fashioned spray paint. So look up on YouTube how to spray paint a gun camo, how to rattle can a gun camo, and just practice on something else. Practice on one of your hard gun cases. Practice on a holster, and practice on that. And when you get one that you like, when you get one that comes out that you like, then take that and put it on a gun. And when it starts to wear off, spray paint it again. I'm about using my guns. I'm not a gun collector. This is not Gun Collector Life. This is Gunfighter Life. And I've got a lot of painted guns, both that I've had done professionally and that I've done myself. But if it improves the functionality of the gun, either wear resistance or resistance to the elements, or honestly, just because I like it, then there's nothing wrong with that. You should bond with the gun that you have, and you should form a relationship with it and liking it, and it having kind of a not really a personality, but having its own character, I guess, is kind of part of that. So there's nothing wrong with that. The other thing would be actually modifying the frame of a handgun, or modifying like the receiver of a rifle or something like that. And I would say that If you want to, most serious competition shooters, most serious, gunfighters are not afraid of a Dremel. So don't be afraid to get a Dremel. Like we talked about, practice on a hard gun case, practice on a holster, but don't be afraid of a Dremel and a heat gun or a soldering iron to, make a more aggressive texture. Or if you shoot your gun a lot and you realize that, part of that frame is holding you back, you could hold the gun higher, you could hold the gun better or grip it better. If you took off a little bit of that material, then, don't be afraid to take a Dremel to it. Especially the polymer framed, Glocks, M&Ps, things like that. There's nothing wrong with taking a Dremel to them. My STI that I got, that was, several $1,000s. If it wasn't the first night I got it, it was very soon after I got it, I was taking a Dremel to it, because I didn't get it to look pretty. I got it to shoot well first and foremost. It does look good, but I'm not afraid to take a Dremel to it if it improves the functionality for me and fits my hand well. But you're probably not going to know that until you get out and either are really good with guns and you just know when a gun fits you, or you shoot that gun enough that you know that gun's got something that needs to be modified. So keep that in mind. Other things that are easy to modify on Glocks, M&Ps, things like that are the controls. The slide release, the magazine release. If you want to put bigger ones on there, you can try that. Bigger is not always better. I've learned from being a firearms instructor, a lot of people run into problems when they put those bigger controls on there, so make sure it works for you. A lot of times their gun will hit that and it will either cause a malfunction, like causing the slide to lock back when the gun's not empty, or the reverse of that, with their grip. If they make the controls too big, it'll actually hold it down and the slide won't lock back on the last round. Either one of those is not really good. You're probably better off with the standard one, or even making it smaller with a Dremel like we just talked about, so you don't do that. But there is a time and a place for bigger controls. For instance, on a 1911, the way they generally come from the factory, I cannot drop the magazine without manipulating my grip. And if I want to shoot fast, I want to do less. And the less I have to do to manipulate that gun to get that magazine out and a fresh one in, the faster I'll be. So I do put just a very simple aftermarket spring in those to make them a little bit easier to depress. And that's really all I have to do, and it costs $3 or $4, $5, something like that, to put that spring in there. Things like that. That's really it. Most of my controls are pretty factory standard on those. If it comes with like an ambi safety, if it's a 1911, I'll run it. If it doesn't, I don't care. I can manipulate the safety with either hand. Doesn't really matter to me whether I'm shooting right-handed or left-handed. I can very easily just throw my thumb over. But if you want to do things like that, there's nothing wrong with the controls. Especially on something like, everybody knows that Glocks and ARs are super easy to mod. I didn't go too big into ARs today because AR mods could be its whole own. There's whole podcasts that just talk about ARs, and a lot of that is how to mod your ARs and which handguard is better and which, optic is better. So I'm not getting super into that today. Just a couple of quick things on modifying firearms and things to consider. With that being said, guys, and this being a no editing, just pausing and collecting my thoughts and talking about modifications. And just some encouragement. I worked last night and I'm about to go out to the range today. So don't forget to get out there. I know ammo's harder to get. And some advice I give to the guys that work for me is forget about what ammo used to cost. It costs what it costs now. Get out there and train. It is what it is. Dry fire first and foremost, but don't forget to get out there and train. That's so much more important than the mods. Obviously you need a gun, obviously you need ammo, but none of that does any good. That gun can sit on a table fully loaded until it rots away back into the earth, and it will never do anything without somebody behind it. So you are the most important part of that equation right there. So use what God's given you, get out there and engage with those tools and become a better gunfighter. Thanks for listening to Gunfighter Life, guys. Thanks, and have a blessed day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.